Sailors, fishermen, divers of Reddit, what are some creepy or odd, weird things you've seen or experienced during your time on or around water? Part 1? Please like and subscribe to support this channel. I sail on tall ships. Sailed through a gap in a massive line squall once. Just a horizon-filling wall of very dark weather coming at us. We doused sail down to our storm sails because it looked like it was going to be seriously ugly. Then, it sounds ridiculous when I write it down, like an overdramatic story, but a gap opened up almost directly in front of us, and we sailed through in this very eerie atmosphere of little gusts whipping at our sails, but nothing like the heavy winds we were expecting. The wall moved on behind us while we went back into calm airs, and not long later there wasn't a gap visible at all. I worked on the flight deck of a carrier for 3 years. 2 deployments to Arabian Sea, also transited the Suez. Felt the call of the void, as I've heard it called. Would be smoking on a weather deck watching the sea speedy by. Leaning against the railings, sometimes the thought of jumping over would materialize in my mind. For the briefest second it's almost comforting, like a faint magnetism to just do it. Then it's gone. It never even disturbed me, so much as baffled me. Also, the ocean is alien. It's unbelievably vast, deep and barren, on the surface anyways. I would often ponder what was going on below us, and obviously fantasize about deep sea monsters, ghost ships, creepy paranormal stuff. The vast size always unnerved me. It's just something you have to experience, being hundreds of miles from land. It's crazy. Summer of '88 I was working as a tenderman for BC Packers on a fish packer. It was just myself and my skipper. There is usually a crew of 3 on the small packers. Anyways, the beginning of the summer we motored up the inside passage and passed a place called Bewdale. Bewdale used to be a cannery town of about 10,000 people that had abandoned the place for over 10 years at that point. Even in midday it looked creepy as fuck going past it, right out of a Stephen King novel. It transfixed me in its eeriness. It was only accessible by boat or float plane. Its destroyed and dilapidated largeness loomed like a faceless ghoul peering at us from the distant shore as we floated by. Flash forward 3 to 4 months later and we are heading back down the passage. It was around 3 a.m. when he heads in the dark towards fucking Butedale. I am perturbed about the situation, but I say nothing to my skipper BCS. Over the last several months I've learned not to like or trust him. He was a bad seaman, had made many bad decisions putting our lives in unnecessary danger. Saying anything to him was pointless and I didn't want him thinking I was scared of the dark or some shit like that. I was out on deck with the bowline in hand. He had the boat's floodlight fixed on the crapped out, dilapidated dock we were to tie up to when I got the weirdest feeling. For the first time that summer, and ever with him, I leaned in the wheelhouse window and asked him if we could drop anchor instead of tying up to the dock. He looked at me weird and of course said, "No, I want to tie up," so I leapt off the boat, quickly tied her up. Headed straight for my faux hole and for the first time, locked my hatch. My skipper told me later he heard me do this. He realized I had never locked my hatch before and we had harbored up in some pretty sketchy places over the summer, so he got out of his bunk and grabbed a galley knife and slept with that. A couple hours later at daybreak I untie the boat. All is well, nothing went awry. As the boat is slowly motoring away from the dock, I am in the stern fetching some eggs and bacon out of a couple of coolers we had tied back there when something caught my attention and I look up to see 2 caveman-looking mothfuckers staring right at me. They were about 30 feet away from me and the 3 of us looked pretty startled and I start screaming for my skipper, Richard. "Get the fuck out here." Me screaming that seemed to snap them out of what seemed to be a trance or something. I never took my eyes off of them. My skipper ran out to the stern. We were in autopilot so we were still motoring away but very slowly. At this point the 2 caveman dudes started lopping down the dock and towards the ramp to the upper wharf in the abandoned town. They didn't run, they lopped sideways while their arms waved around and kept looking over their shoulders as they disappeared up the ramp and into the town. While still looking at them running away, my skipper said, "What the fuck is that?" I am still looking at them in shock and disbelief and I said I had no fucking clue. We both immediately checked the coolers and the shit on the deck. Everything was untouched. We think we may have gotten out of there just before they were about to board. This is what they looked like. They were both physically very similar, around 5 feet 2-5 feet 4, extremely barrel-chested, short but very, very thick legs. They were both heavily bearded and both had long, matted hair. Their faces were hard to detect even though they weren't very far away when we saw them, especially when I first looked up and saw them. But what I remember is they looked human, but like a caveman. One had black hair, the other was reddish-brown. They were wearing clothing but extremely dirty and torn-up jeans. I remember being able to see their hairy calves were very torn, and matching red and black ripped-up logging jackets. That's my story and it 100% true. A few years back my friend's boat was hit by a rogue wave and almost everyone on board was lost at sea, including one of my best childhood friends. Fucked me up pretty good, made me question my own life and relationship to risk, mortality, etc. Fast forward some years later, I was sitting out on a random bluff looking out at the Pacific in the general direction of the accident, thinking my thoughts, when an older man walked up. I was in a pretty secluded spot and was generally trying to put out the vibe I just wanted to be left alone, but he just launched into how he found a body down on the beach below us a few years back and how difficult it was getting the boat in there, etc. He asked me when I was leaving again and I told him I was done with rolling the dice and planned to chill. He chuckled and said I just didn't know it yet and that I was similar to him in that we had to roam, wander, explore and push our limits. I tried to call his bluff and asked where he was going next and he immediately with all seriousness replied he was going to sail Indonesia on a DIY raft, canoe. We ended up chatting for maybe an hour about all sorts of shit, but most just an older man mentoring an obviously depressed younger man. I never mentioned the accident but it felt like he was speaking directly to it the entire conversation. We had been to some of the same places in the Himalaya and generally connected in uncanny ways. One thing in common thing is a coincidence, but at what point is it not? When he got up to leave he said something about how this was probably one of the strangest conversations of my life and walked away. While fishing at a lake in a cove fed by a creek I was catching trout. I was hauling in several quickly, mostly hatchery fish. But then suddenly my pole dipped and my line broke instantly. Now sometimes there are salmon that make it up to the lake and I only had 6 pounds test line. So I shrug it off and reset my rigging and cast out. 2 minutes and same thing happens. I get a bit upset. So I put the hook back together and go again. And same thing happens a third time. Well, I was due to put new line on my reel, so I reach in my tackle box and pull out 18 pounds line. I start adding it to my spool. I set up a treble hook and bait, and cast out. Sure enough this time I get a bite and my pole bends down, but the line doesn't break. I fought that thing for what seemed like 15 or 20 minutes trying to get it to the surface. But my reel was small and the drag wasn't meant for this much work. It seemed like an endless battle. Finally I decided I'd just hook the pole into a small tree's V-branch, and wade out in the water following the line with my hand and grab the fish that way. So I start wading out into the water. The line goes straight into the center of the cove where the water is 12 feet deep and murky. I'm like fuck it. I dive down, no visibility. I follow the line blindly using my hand, and touch something squishy. It isn't slimy or scaly like a fish, but it was definitely organic. It isn't moving really. I try and yank on it. A bit rips away and the fishing line comes free. I swim to the surface with it in my hand, and I get to the bank short-breathed. I am looking at what's in my hand and can't make it out until I do. I toss it 5 feet from me once I realize what I was holding onto. I had a chunk of cow flesh in my hand. Apparently a cow was swept down the river and died, got waterlogged and was caught in a current that kept it going up and down this cove. My line kept getting caught on the cow's flesh and the hide was still too strong to rip away, but my whole hand had pushed inside the cow when I touched it. Sure enough, not minutes after I got to the shore, all the inflated guts from gases started spilling out that hole I made in the flesh. The innards started floating on the water's surface. Grossest experience I ever had fishing. Diving Palancar Gardens in Cozumel in about 70 feet of water. A lovely drift dive and then a 3-foot, give or take an inch, grouper swam into my field of vision. Something seemed off with its movement and then I noticed an 8-inch jagged bite out of its dorsal region. It kept swimming awkwardly with a faint trail of chum following. There were no other apex predators around, but for the rest of the dive I was on edge. I would have been fine spotting a white tip reef or even a tiger shark. Not knowing though. Fisherman here, recreational and also fished commercially when I was younger. Lots of creepy things have happened out there, but I'll just share a couple for now. First one was the time we got caught in some sort of electrical storm. Back when I was working on an inshore dragger, out on a dead calm day in a thick pea soup fog. I'm out working on deck and all of a sudden the air just starts to feel off. I don't really know how to describe it exactly. Just like, the air had a sensation to it, and I actually start to hear a faint buzzing in my ear. At the same time I'm becoming aware of this, the captain comes out from the wheelhouse laughing. I look over and the hair on his head is standing on end, like if someone just rubbed a balloon all over his head. He points at me and I realize my hair is standing on end too. We kinda laugh about it for a minute and then it occurs to us that there is probably a goddamn imminent lightning strike incoming, and we both take cover back in the wheelhouse. No lightning ever struck though. I guess the front just moved on and things kinda went back to normal after 10 minutes or so and we just went back to work. The second one is probably the only borderline, paranormal thing I've ever experienced. Night fishing with my wife and a female friend on a local river and watching a meteor shower, just chilling, drinking, fishing. I decide I want to check out a spot further downriver so I leave them behind and head off into the woods. I'm about 100 yards or so down the path, all alone, just me and the crickets, when I hear a female voice say my name. Loudly, plain as day, like someone was standing a few feet behind me and was trying to get my attention. I turn around naturally thinking one of the girls followed me into the woods, but nope, no one there. I am not really a huge believer in the supernatural or anything, but this absolutely freaked me the hell out. So I just immediately head back, and sure enough, they're still hanging out on the riverbank watching the meteor shower. There is absolutely no way I could have heard them that clearly from that far away. I told them what happened and they still to this day think I was just fucking with them and trying to scare them. But I'm telling you, I still get the willies thinking about it and in fact have never been back to that spot since. Not me, but my dad. He was a volunteer firefighter in the early 80s and was scuba certified, so he was a go-to guy for any water retrievals, rescues. My mom told me, as an adult, that he had to respond to a call where a woman had driven onto a lake with thin ice, her 2 young kids in the backseat. Dad had to retrieve all 3 from the vehicle. I'm not clear on the details, but it became apparent that this was a murder-suicide. He doesn't talk much about his time as a firefighter, I think because my brother and I were both really little at the time and the incident shook him. I worked in the Mediterranean seas doing oil stuff. Children backpacks would sometimes float by, along with other miscellaneous debris. This was from refugees usually fleeing Libya who did not make it. How crazy the weather can change. Like you would see a few menacing-looking clouds but everywhere else is sunny. When they would reach us the weather would get crazy bad but might only last 20 minutes. Maybe a little out of place as I'm sure op meant commercial fishermen and not recreational, but I think this is a neat creepy story anyway so I'll share. I am a bass fisherman but my fiancée likes to fish for catfish, so, one night, I decided to take her night fishing for catfish since she didn't get to go with me very often on my bass fishing excursions due to work schedules. Anyway, we're fishing and have a nice little campfire going and I just start to feel off. I've been an outdoorsman all my life and don't get freaked out too easily about the woods or the night or anything like that. So, I feel off but I ask the fiancée if she's having a good time and she said that she was, but now she's feeling kinda creeped out. So, we waited for a second and that's when I noticed that there was not a single sound to be heard. No night birds, no crickets, nothing. I tell the so it's time to pack up and to do so quickly but not in a panicked way. She asks why and I said that sometimes when a predator is nearby it will get really quiet like that. We pack up and as we're about to drive off I hear something large step on a branch and make a loud crack. Anyway, I don't know what it was but I had seen bear droppings near there a time or two so it could have been that, a coyote, or it could have just been our minds playing tricks on us. Certainly nothing that I think was supernatural, but those kinds of things will definitely make you feel vulnerable. My grandfather was in the Royal Navy for a few decades. At the end of WW2, he was helping ship Japanese prisoners of war back to the West. Many of them were suffering from serious trauma and had completely lost their grasp of reality from the torture. He was asleep in his bunk, often they were stacked with 3 or more levels. The guy below him had lost it and drove a knife up through his mattress. Luckily my grandpa was asleep on his side and the knife missed him by millimeters. He said those months at sea were hardest of his entire naval life. I was a sailor, submariner, sonar technician, in the Navy for 5 years. I can't think of many odd, weird things, aside from the 1000% hyper-inflated gay jokes to include some guys repeatedly flashing other guys. Creepy is easy. The overall sense of dread involving being inside a steel tube hundreds plus of feet underwater. When the sonar system goes down, crashes, and you frantically work to troubleshoot and repair the network because you're hundreds of feet underwater, and without that sonar suite you are 100% blind to what is going on in the ocean around you. If you take creepy to the level of downright terrifying, then I would simply say whenever any alarm, fire, flooding, sounds, and it is not a drill. That's pants-shitting terror. This was probably my creepiest moment underwater. I am dive certified and now work professionally in that field. But when I was first starting off diving, about 10 years ago in the state of Maine, I had one pants-shitting moment. I just got my advanced certification. And a few friends and I decide to go dive a cool location with lots of life, huge starfish, lobsters, etc. But the coolest part one thought was that there was this old shipwreck from the early 1800s. It sits in about 40 feet of water, so as diving goes pretty easy to get to without special gear. And some people say it is haunted, which I didn't believe. But here is kicker. Maine and this particular dive site has one crazy silty bottom. Silt is like this fine layer of all sorts of crap that sits nicely over the bottom. And if you stir it up your visibility goes to shit. So we start the dive. We get down fine and visibility was great. We can see maybe 15 or 17 feet, great for Maine. We are heading towards the reek and I am a few feet behind my buddy taking my time. I look up, and there is this huge cloud of silt headed right for us. I think I shit, there goes this nice dive. But I just keep going. The cloud of silt consumes the reek. Then my friends. Then my buddy. And I cannot see any of them as it heads for me. Just before it gets to me I see this small childlike face. I start freaking out. It's getting closer and creepier. All of the sudden those haunted stores become real. That small child's face is getting closer and closer. The silt consumes me, and I am alone with this fucking creepy face headed right for me. I am pretty sure I pissed my wetsuit. All of the sudden that creepy ass child face hits me right in my mask. It was a old doll face washed up by the silt. Still pissed myself. Still won't dive that site. We were doing a night dive, creepy enough on its own. Doing a wreck penetration on the Wisconsin, off Winthrop Harbor Ill. Being Lake Michigan, at that depth the time if day stops mattering, it is dark, and this is not so good without lights. We go in, with lines to show us the way out, and wouldn't you know it, my buddy takes a kick and stirs everything up. No amount of light was going to help anyone see shit. I can't find the line. It was inches from me. I lose the ability to tell which way is up, and can't see my bubbles to follow them. Oh, find MYU buddy's ankle, and someone else finds mine, and I get pulled back and out of the wreck while hanging on for dear life to my buddy. We're out. In reality it was less than 30 seconds, but it seemed like forever. When I was a youngin', I convinced my mum to let me tag along with my dad and his mates on an overnight deep sea fishing trip. Long story short, around midnight, Dad and I were just looking out at the water in the middle of nowhere. It was so dark, there must not have been a star in the sky. So dark that you couldn't tell where the sky began on the horizon. Everything was black and quiet. After a while, he was like, "You wanna go for a swim?" Wanting to appear brave, I was like, "Sure." We both jumped in and just kinda floated there. The sea was so calm, it was surreal. It was so dark and I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. With hundreds of meters of pitch black sea under me, I realized that this was the first time in my life that I felt scared. Like deep down in my gut scared. I climbed back on our boat 100% fine, but I sometimes remember that feeling. When I was a teenager, I was alone on a rowboat in the middle of a small lake, about a mile or two long by no more than 200 yards at its widest. I was mostly just enjoying the day. I dropped a lure into the water expecting nothing, almost as an afterthought. Something big grabbed it though, and pulled hard enough for the entire boat to be pulled about 10 feet and turned 180 degrees. Force transferred to the boat via my fishing rod and my death grip on it. The line snapped and that was the end of it. Prior to this, my friend who lived on the lake had told a few other friends and me that one morning waiting for the school bus he saw a huge living thing in the lake. He described it as being the size of a car and brown, to the best of my recollection. He refused to swim in the lake from then on. He wore mild prescription glasses and of course due to this we teased him mercilessly about seeing the lake monster. But damn, whatever took my lure that day was big. I like to think it was just a huge carp, but I dunno. Back when I worked at the dive locker on Eglin AFB, I had this 06 come in and demand we requalify his cert before we leave, even though the weather was nasty and it was already near the end of the working day. My chief couldn't tell him no but advised we not go out in the bad Gulf weather. Colonel wasn't hearing it and demanded we go. We take our patrol boat out about 30 minutes, then the jackass and myself get in the water. I'm underwater for maybe 2 minutes still conducting pre-dive checks on jackass gear when I get the tug on my line indicating emergency bailout. I give the hand signs to the jackass that we have to ascend, but he shakes his head and points down insisting we continue. I get the line tug again. I point up emphatically and jackass points down emphatically. I grab the jackass by his regulator and drag him to the surface. The moment we break the surface he starts to scream at little enlisted me and my chief yells at him to shut the fuck up in as rude of a manner as possible. Then chief fucking screams and points at the massive waterspout a mile away. We all scramble back into the boat and haul balls as this aquatic tornado chases us back to base. Scariest moment of my diving career, and certainly weird and odd how quickly the rank dynamic changed once we were back in the boat and my chief was laying into this colonel.